So when I went to prison, I suppose when I could bring myself to think about the day of my release, because it felt so far away. When I thought about it, I imagined something very filmic, almost sort of like a American prison film, the great gate opening and you walk out, into the future. And it's nothing like that. Particularly for me, because I was released from an open prison. So one day they just said, got on the tannoy and said, Shipley, come on up. And I went up and said, you need to go over to do your release paperwork. And I handed him my key and walked off with my bag over my shoulder. Now, and it couldn't have felt more anticlimactic. I signed some paperwork and got in a car, And I think throughout our prison sentences, prisoners often believe we are going to have this great joyful moment of release, and actually it's much more complicated than that. And I speak to lots of men who I got to know in prison, and I talk to people on Twitter about this, and I think it's very common, this experience that we've expected it to be this experience of absolute joy. I'm released, it's over. And actually it can be quite difficult. There can be a confusion, lots of sadness, lots of negative emotions. I think certainly while I was in prison, I think I essentially just parked a lot of negative feelings. And then after I got out, I had to start processing them. And I think that's very common. I think also, the world outside can feel quite chaotic. Just yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who has been released after about 15 years in prison. And he was just saying, it's just keeping on top of everything you have to do is hard. Because in prison a lot is done for you. There's, you don't have to worry about paying an electricity bill or the rent or doing your grocery shopping or, all sorts of things that we just have to do in life. So when someone's beginning, particularly for a longer sentence, I think there is a sort of, it can be quite overwhelming to suddenly have to be responsible for all this extra stuff. And I think the sort of shadows of prison stay with you. They certainly stay with me. I often think about the terrible things I saw, particularly in Wandsworth, the noise, the kind of the yelling and screaming at night. And it's the work of years, I think, to let that go, if you can ever let it go. I've been out for nearly 2.5 years, and I'm still haunted by that stuff. And I think, as with any really traumatic experience, it can be like that. I remember right at the end of my sentence, I was walking around the grounds at Holsey Bay with another prisoner who'd been a soldier for a long time. We were both near the end of our sentences, both close to being released. And I said to him, "So what's it been like? What's your sentence been like?" And he said it was a lot like a deployment or a war zone, in that I feel like I've had this really strange, unique experience that no one can really understand unless they've been there. And a lot of it was very boring, some of it was terrifying, some of it was awful. But I don't really know how to process it because I don't really have anyone to talk to about it. And that stayed with me. I think prison is a very, very unique experience, and one that's very, very hard to understand unless you have been there. So I think that's part of why I try to talk about it, to help people understand. But I suspect also, I'm an armchair psychologist myself, I suspect part of what I do is in writing about prison, talking about prison, going to inspect prisons, doing a PhD around imprisonment. I'm probably looking to make the object of my trauma and my fear feel safe, because I'm engaging with it which I can control. That's my way of going. But I think everyone who's been to prison has to find ways of resolving and healing from that.